Welcome to episode 4 of the Working With Me podcast. Today we're going to do a deep dive into something that's, I think, very relatable to all of us. Working smarter,
Mm,
not harder.
right.
So we have two really interesting sources today. One of them is a McKinsey report that unpacks the potential of social technologies in the workplace. And then the other is a story about Claire Hughes Johnson, who's the COO of Stripe. And she uses a document called a How to Work With Me document to set clear expectations with her team.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see kind of how these two things will connect. But let's start with that McKinsey report. There was a stat in it that really caught my eye. 72% of companies are using social technologies, but very few are actually getting the most benefit out of them.
Right.
It's like, are we just scratching the surface here?
Yeah, totally. And what's really interesting about this report is they found that the biggest potential benefit of using these tools isn't necessarily customer facing,
Yeah.
but internal. It's really about leveraging social technologies to improve communication and knowledge sharing within companies themselves.
Huh. That's interesting because I think a lot of us associate social media with, marketing and external communication, but thinking about it as a way to break down silos in your own company, that's kind of a cool way to think about it.
It really is. And imagine a world where every message, every idea shared becomes content that is instantly accessible to anyone in the company. That's the kind of transparency and knowledge flow that social tools could help enable.
Yeah, it's like having a collective brain that everyone can tap into. No more searching for information or reinventing the wheel.
Right. And the impact of productivity could be huge. McKinsey estimates that using social tools correctly could boost interaction workers' productivity by 20 to 25%.
Whoa, okay, hold on. 20 to 25%. That's a big number.
Yeah.
Think about all the time we spend, on email, which is 28% of the week, according to McKinsey, or searching for information internally, which eats up another 20%. If we could reclaim some of that time, imagine what we could do.
Right. And it's not just about time savings, though. It's about creating a more connected and engaged workforce. When people feel like they have access to the information they need and they can easily collaborate with their colleagues, it really empowers them to do their best work.
It's that feeling of isolation that can creep in sometimes, especially when you're working remotely. It can help bridge that gap.
Totally. And that's where I think the cultural shift comes in. It's not enough to just implement the technology. We need to create a workplace culture that embraces transparency, collaboration, and trust.
That makes me think about that second source, this story about Claire Hughes Johnson and this How to Work With Me document. This is someone who's not just talking about collaboration, but actually putting it into practice in a really tangible way.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear more about that document.
Well, so, instead of just laying down the law, she created a guide that kind of outlines her work style, her preferences, her expectations in a way that encourages open dialogue and feedback with her team.
I like that because I think so often, misunderstandings come from unstated assumptions. Having a document like this could be really helpful to bridge that gap.
And she's really direct about it. One thing she says is, quote, "I'm not a micromanager, but if things are off track, I'll tell you."
Oh, I appreciate that honesty, It's transparent right from the start.
And she also really encourages her team to push back on her ideas. She says, quote, "Your job is to get my sense of something and argue it out with me. I love a good fight to a better outcome."
Oh, that's great. It really sets up a culture where people feel comfortable, disagreeing even with the boss.
And this part was really interesting to me because it kind of shows that she's aware of her own, areas for growth. She says, quote, "Please flag it to me if I'm saying yes to too many things."
Wow. I think that level of self-awareness and being open to feedback is really inspiring.
It's like we're all in this together,
Speaking of all being in this together, this might be a good time to mention a really helpful resource for our listeners. If you're interested in learning more about creating a more collaborative and productive work environment, we have tons of tips templates, further reading at workingwithmedoc.card.co.
That's a great reminder. We'll share that link again at the end of the episode. But going back to Claire's story, her How to Work With Me document was super well received at Stripe. And it even inspired other people to make their own versions. I think it's a testament to the power of clear communication and expectation setting.
Yeah, it's about getting everyone on the same page.
I think what's really sticking with me is this idea that technology is just one piece of the puzzle. It's how we use it, the culture we build around it that makes all the difference.
And that brings us to a really important question. How do we cultivate a company culture that embraces transparency, collaboration, trust? We're going to dive into that more in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back for part two of our deep dive. We just wrapped up talking about, social technologies and Claire Hughes Johnson's approach to setting expectations, but it got me thinking about the impact on company culture. Like you can have all the right tools in place, even, documents and things like that. But if the overall company culture isn't aligned, it's kind of like building a house on a shaky foundation, right?
Totally. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about trust. Without that trust between colleagues, managers and leadership, even the best tech or the, perfectly worded document isn't going to be that effective.
Right. It just creates this like climate of fear and suspicion, which stifles creativity.
I think about, say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You can't really go together effectively if there's no trust.
So how do we even cultivate a culture of trust in the workplace? Like, where do we even begin? Well, I think it starts at the top with leadership, right?
Yeah, for sure. Leaders have to model the behavior they want to see in their teams, being transparent, approachable, willing to admit when they've made mistakes.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. When leaders show vulnerability and openness to feedback, it sends a powerful message to the rest of the organization.
It shows that it's okay to not have all the answers, to ask for help.
Yeah.
Learn from your mistakes.
And it creates this ripple effect that encourages others to do the same.
And it's not just about top-down trust either, right? It's also about fostering trust among peers.
Yeah, that horizontal trust is so important, making sure that colleagues feel comfortable, relying on each other and supporting each other's growth.
That's where those social technologies that we were talking about earlier can really shine. If they're used right, they can help break down those silos and build relationships across teams and developments.
I mean, imagine instead of sending those impersonal emails, you could connect with colleagues on a platform, share ideas, ask questions, celebrate successes.
Speaking of helpful resources, remember working with medoc.card.co.
Oh, yeah, that's a great place to find practical tips and tools for building that more collaborative and trusting work culture.
Yeah, they have resources on everything from communication strategies to team building exercises, so definitely check that out. But in addition to trust, another really important element of a healthy work culture is psychological safety.
Right, psychological safety.
Can you remind me what exactly that means in the context of work?
Yeah, so psychological safety is that feeling of security that lets individuals be themselves, take risks, and speak up without fear of negative consequences.
Like if you have a good idea, but you're afraid to share it because you don't want to be judged or ridiculed.
Exactly, and when you don't have that sense of psychological safety, it can really hinder, creativity and innovation.
It goes back to what Claire Hughes Johnson was saying about having those good fights, right? And embracing diverse perspectives.
Yeah, having those healthy debates and challenging assumptions, that's how we get to the best solutions.
But, creating that kind of environment takes a conscious effort.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders need to be really intentional about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and open-mindedness.
And being willing to let go of the need to be right all the time. It's about learning from each other, and recognizing that we can all contribute to finding the best solution.
It's a real shift in mindset from like a culture of blame to a culture of learning and collaboration.
And that shift requires, a change in mindset for both leaders and individuals. It means being more curious, more compassionate, and more willing to kind of embrace the unknown.
It's about fostering a culture of continuous improvement where we're all learning, adapting, and evolving together.
And that's a journey, not a destination, It's
Yeah.
an ongoing process of building those relationships, breaking down barriers, and creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work.
So we've talked a lot about the big ideas, the power of social technologies, the importance of trust and psychological safety. But I want to hear some practical tips, like how can we actually put these ideas into action?
Yeah, how do we actually implement this stuff? So let's start with the social technologies. We know they can boost productivity and collaboration, but where do we begin?
There are just like so many tools out there. It's hard to know which ones to choose.
Yes. You're right, it can be overwhelming, and it's easy to just get caught up in the hype and think you need every single platform. But the truth is, it's not about having the most tools. It's about having the right tools.
So how do we figure out which tools are the right ones for our team?
I think you have to ask yourself some key questions, like what are your biggest communication challenges? Are you trying to improve project management, knowledge sharing, team bonding? Do you need something for real-time chat or more like asynchronous discussions?
Those are good questions. And I think it's also important to consider the tools we already have, right? We don't want to overcomplicate things.
Absolutely. Integration is key. You want tools that can connect with your existing systems and actually make things easier.
So let's say we've picked out a few potential tools. What are some things to keep in mind when we're actually implementing them?
One of the biggest mistakes I see is companies just rolling out a new tool with no training or support. You can't just expect people to figure it out on their own.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. At my last job, they introduced this new communication platform, but there was no training, no guidelines. It just created more confusion, honestly.
Yeah, that happens a lot. You need to be proactive about providing clear documentation, training sessions, and support so people actually understand how to use the tool.
It's also about setting expectations right. So,
Yeah.
like, how will this tool be used?
Exactly. You need to think about how to integrate it into your daily routine.
Finding that balance between flexibility and structure.
And don't forget about the human element. Create some excitement, get people on board, maybe involve them in the selection process, ask for their feedback.
Right. If people feel like they're part of the process, they're more likely to be excited about it.
So moving on a bit, let's talk about setting clear expectations in general. We discussed that how to work with me document. But what are some other ways we can do this?
I think it comes down to open and honest communication. Being willing to have those maybe sometimes uncomfortable conversations about work styles, preferences, expectations.
Right, and it's an ongoing thing. Those conversations need to happen regularly.
It's also helpful to document those expectations,
Mm.
in a way that everyone can easily access.
Yeah, like a shared document or a team wiki. That way there's no confusion.
And, speaking of resources, that website we mentioned earlier, workingwithmedoc.card.co, it's a great resource for all of this stuff, communication tips, templates for creating your own How to Work With Me document.
Yeah, it's a great place to start.
So last but not least, company culture. How can we actually create that sense of trust and psychological safety?
It's about the little things. Being reliable, keeping your promises, actively listening to your colleagues.
Creating a space where people feel comfortable taking risks.
Right. A
Um,
culture of learning, not blame.
And leaders need to be vulnerable too. Admit their own mistakes. Ask for help. Show that growth mindset.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels safe to experiment and innovate.
And celebrating both successes and failures.
Yes, learning from our mistakes.
I think what's really sticking with me is that building a great workplace culture is a journey, not a destination.
Couldn't agree more, and it's a journey worth taking. When people feel trusted, respected, and empowered, incredible things can happen.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into working smarter. Don't forget to check out workingwithmedoc.card.co for more resources. And until next time, keep working smarter, not harder.
And keep those lines of communication open.